I have always prided myself on being level-headed, on never letting my emotions get the best of me, no matter how turbulent life became. That was before my next-door neighbor brazenly, and with meticulous calculation, stole my family's land. My name is Ava Brooks. I am a quiet person by nature, more comfortable with books and ideas than with confrontations. But my neighbor Darius Granger tested me beyond my limits. He found a vulnerable place in my life to exploit, and he underestimated my resolve. It took me to the breaking point and beyond. This is the story of how I reclaimed not only my property, but my sense of self. This is the story of the lengths I had to go to in order to ensure justice. And, perhaps, it is also the story of how I learned that true support sometimes appears in the most unexpected places. When I first purchased my cottage on Hawthorne Lane, I was overjoyed. It was a modest place, hemmed in by an ancient oak forest. The land had once belonged to my grandmother, who had inherited it from her grandmother. The legacy of my female ancestors left me with a special sense of protection and connection to the soil beneath my feet. I grew up hearing bedtime stories about how each generation of women in my family had left an imprint on this land, both literal and figurative. My grandmother used to say, "Ava, if you listen hard enough, you'll hear the echoes of us in the wind." At first, my neighbor, an older man named Darius Granger, seemed entirely pleasant, if aloof. He would greet me with a polite nod whenever I strolled down the gravel lane to my mailbox. Sometimes, I'd see him tending to his lavish gardens that stretched almost to our shared property line. But I didn't pay him much mind. I was lost in the challenges of settling into a new place, painting the walls, organizing the shelves, adjusting to life after losing my mother a year before. I could not have predicted the disaster that was about to unfold. One humid afternoon, I ambled through the backyard with a mug of tea, letting the steam mingle with the late summer haze. Something caught my attention, a row of newly built fencing posts hammered straight into the earth, on my side of the property line. Confusion lanced through me. Why would Darius plant fencing posts on land that clearly, by property survey, belonged to me? I took a few pictures on my phone, feeling more curious than alarmed at this point. It started so innocently. When I approached Darius about it that same evening, I was polite. He shrugged, gave me a wolfish grin, and said, "Oh, the old survey lines are outdated. I had an expert come out. This portion belongs to me." He rattled off some technicalities, name-dropped a surveyor's firm, and promised to show me paperwork if I wanted it. I left that conversation conflicted. My mind was filled with both a sense of dread that something was off and a nagging voice telling me to calm down. I didn't want to be the loud, crazy neighbor who blew things out of proportion, but inside, there was a small ember of anxiety and anger igniting. I resolved to do some digging. I contacted my own surveyor, someone recommended by a local friend, who confirmed my worst fear. Darius's expert was nowhere to be found in any official directory, and indeed, the land in question rightfully belonged to me. Armed with the truth, I again tried to speak with Darius. The first requested a formal sit-down. It was cold outside by then, a biting December wind swirling around us when we met at his garden gate. He extended a cordial enough invitation for me to join him in his heated garage, so we could chat comfortably. Against my better judgment, I entered. Inside, the space was immaculate. Tools hung in neat rows on the wall. The floor was freshly swept. The stark light overhead cast Darius's silhouette in a harsh, angular shape. I trembled, but not purely from the cold. He handed me a folder and said, "Here's the documentation. It's all legit." What I saw were official-looking documents with engineering stamps, property lines that seemed exactly reversed of what my own survey had concluded. My immediate thought was that these were fabrications. Before I could accuse him, Darius said, "Ava, I'm sorry if this confuses you. Your grandmother's will might have left you misinformed. But trust me, I've been doing this a long time. I wouldn't build on someone else's land." It was such a rehearsed display, the veneer of sincerity so perfectly polished that I almost questioned my own reality. Yet my instincts screamed that something was wrong. Tension thrummed in the air, and I realized that our conversation had not only become about property lines. It felt like a test of wills, a dance on the razor's edge. A sense of danger crackled through me. I attempted calm. "I think we should work this out through an attorney," I said, my voice as even as I could manage. Darius nodded, returning that wolfish grin. He tapped the side of his nose as if to say, "Good luck, you'll need it." Over the next several weeks, I sought legal counsel. The law office I consulted seemed supportive at first, but they soon realized that Darius had connections, a cousin who was a judge in our county, an old friend who worked in the local building department. My lawyer did her best, but every time we put forward our rightful claim, we faced an avalanche of red tape, selective hearing, and bureaucratic stalling. Anxiety eroded my sleep. My nights became anxious vigils, spent pacing across my bedroom floor, worrying about how Darius might expand his incursion. He had begun erecting not just fencing, but a small extension of his greenhouse that encroached well into my property. I felt helpless, outraged, confused, and in a constant state of simmering frustration. It was during this low point that I made an unexpected connection with someone who became my rock through the ordeal, a local contractor named Marina. We met on a chilly January morning at the hardware store, where I was gathering items for minor home repairs. Marina observed my tear-streaked face and kindly asked if everything was all right. Before I knew it, I was spilling out the whole mess in the middle of the paint aisle. Her eyes narrowed as I recounted the tale. I expected pity, but instead I saw empathy and a fierce resolution on her face. Marina said, "I don't know all the legal stuff, but I do know property lines, building codes, the real rules. Let me help you." That moment was a breath of fresh air, the first sense of real support I'd felt since the fiasco began. Soon, I learned that Marina had run her own successful contracting business for a decade and was intimately familiar with the shady shortcuts some landowners took. "We'll gather undeniable evidence," she promised me, determination lighting her face. "He can't twist the truth if we have proof from multiple legitimate channels." So began our quiet, strategic campaign. We documented everything meticulously, taking videos of the greenhouse, photographing every inch of the fence line, pulling up archived aerial property maps from the last 3 decades, and examining geological and tree line markings. Marina even had connections with a reputable surveyor who was well known for testifying in court. When I tried to talk to Darius about reconsidering, tried to reason with him, his condescension escalated. "Look, I don't have time for your nonsense, Miss Brooks," he sneered one evening. "Just move your little garden or whatever it is somewhere else. You've got plenty of land to spare." His smile was taunting, as though he knew something I didn't. The utter arrogance in that moment sparked a flame of indignation within me, turning my fear into a white-hot desire for justice. That's when events took another dark turn: vandalism. One morning, I discovered my truck's tires slashed. A few days later, I woke up to see my flower beds torn up, as if someone had driven over them or deliberately ripped out the plants. My favorite lilac bush, a cutting from my late mother's beloved yard, was uprooted. Despair mingled with a growing fury so intense I could feel it roaring inside me. A creeping voice in the back of my mind whispered, "He's trying to wear you down. He wants to see if you'll break." But I didn't break. I channeled my heartbreak and rage into action. With Marina's unwavering help, I compiled every bit of evidence I could. I filed police reports and brought in a second attorney from a neighboring county with no ties to Darius's network. This new lawyer, Mr. Yang, was fiercely intelligent and possessed a quiet tenacity I deeply admired. "Justice may be slow," he said in a calm voice, "but we'll get there. Every piece of proof we gather is a step closer." The tension between me and Darius escalated to palpable levels. There were times I'd see him watching me from his window, standing motionless, a dark silhouette behind the curtains. I'd feel a prickle on the back of my neck, as though an unseen predator lurked. Each day, I questioned how a normal life could have descended into this nightmare. The deeper I dug, the more I learned of his history. Darius was known for shady property disputes, exploiting obscure legal loopholes and forging official documents. Many had tried to oppose him but settled out of fear or to avoid a protracted legal war. He had bulldozed his way through the county, leaving behind small families' heartbreak and lost land. I found myself in an emotional crucible, torn between fear that I would be just another name on the list of people Darius had cheated and the raw, furious determination not to let him get away with it again. At times, I felt rage so strong that I wondered if I might do something reckless. But each night, I reminded myself of my ancestors. They had faced prejudice, poverty, even family tragedies, but they had held on to this land. I owed it to them and to myself to stand firm, no matter what. At last, our day in court arrived. My heart hammered in my chest as I walked into the small county courthouse with my attorney on one side and Marina on the other. Darius sat at a table across the aisle, wearing an expression of bland confidence. The hearing was set before a judge not closely tied to his network. I watched Darius's lawyer stand up and rattle off false claims with practiced ease. They paraded forged documents that I now recognized from months ago. It was sickening to see how smoothly they tried to manipulate the narrative. Then it was Mr. Yang's turn. He approached the bench calmly and laid out every piece of evidence we had gathered. Survey maps, geotagged photographs, licensed assessor testimonies. I saw Darius's face darken with anger, then shift into a sneer, and finally a flicker of panic. Mr. Yang's quiet voice never wavered as he concluded. These records show, beyond doubt, that Miss Brooks inherited this property. The defendant's encroachment and the subsequent damage to Miss Brooks's property has been not only illegal but deliberately malicious. A hush fell over the courtroom, broken only by the sound of the judge clearing his throat. He asked a few pointed questions, directing them mostly at Darius, who stumbled through half-baked answers. Moments later, the judge declared that enough evidence existed to favor my claim. My body sagged with relief, tears pricking my eyes as the verdict sank in. At the same time, an ember of fear remained, because Darius might appeal or try other methods of intimidation. And indeed, the revenge I sought was not just in the legal realm. It was also about proving to him, and maybe to the ghost of every bully who had ever trespassed on my soul, that I would not be pushed aside. Weeks passed. A wave of relief did wash over me, but I remained cautious. An official order demanded that Darius remove all fencing and the greenhouse extension from my property within 30 days. He was also ordered to pay restitution for the damages, the slashed tires, the destroyed flower beds, and, not least, the emotional distress he had inflicted. Yet, to my dismay, Darius proved as stubborn as ever. Though he removed a few of the fence posts and the greenhouse attachments, he left debris strewn across my lawn, and he still strutted around as though he held the moral high ground. I told my attorney and Marina that I feared he would ignore the court order entirely, but they reassured me that the law was on my side. We had come too far to let him simply flout the judgment. The final breaking point came on an early spring afternoon. A crisp breeze stirred the budding branches of the old oaks as I stood near the property line, staring in disbelief. Darius had taken the scraps of his torn-down fence and piled them in my yard. Not only that, but he'd hung a smug sign that read, "You win. Here's your precious junk." My entire body tensed with a trembling rage that had been building in me for months. I felt it in every fibre of my being, the need to draw a definitive line in the sand, my land. I walked over to Marina's workshop, where she was reorganizing tools. The resolve in my voice surprised even me. "I'm done playing by his script," I said. "He's had every chance to comply with the law, and he still thinks he's above it." Marina's eyes glistened, empathy and fierce support shining through. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. In that moment, I remembered stories from my grandmother. How, generations ago, the women of our family would gather as a community to handle threats to their land. They would not wait for a paternalistic system to deliver them from injustice. They'd stand up together. I thought of how Darius had bulldozed other neighbors past victims, who never got real justice, and a startling clarity sparked in me. This was about more than just the property. This was about making a statement, about refusing to be bullied, about rectifying a morally bankrupt situation by returning fire with unwavering truth. So we mobilized, with the help of a small team of people who believed in me, my attorney, Marina, and a couple of local families who had also been victimized by Darius's predatory tactics. We orchestrated a public demonstration of accountability. We invited a local journalist to witness the removal of Darius's debris, We had uniformed officers on site to enforce the judge's order if necessary. We wore looks of steeled determination. On the appointed day, Darius watched from his porch, his face pale and taut, with barely contained fury, as Marina and I led a group in carefully hauling away the fence scrap he'd dumped. A county official, armed with the final legal order, stood by to ensure compliance. When we reached the greenhouse remnants, a partial frame that still stuck awkwardly over my boundary line, Marina and two other contractors dismantled it piece by piece and carried it out onto Darius's side. Each clang of metal was like the toll of a bell marking the end of his reign of intimidation. Emotions swelled in my chest. For so long, I had felt small and helpless, caught in a labyrinth of fear. But standing there, in broad daylight, supported by friends and bystanders, some of whom I barely knew, I understood in my bones what it meant to reclaim my power. It wasn't a sudden wave of happiness or triumph. It was more profound, like roots digging into the earth, anchoring me with a renewed sense of self. Darius continued to protest loudly, accusing us of trespassing and destruction of property. He called the police himself, ranting on the phone about how we were harassing him. It was almost pitiful to watch his attempts to flip the script. But after so many months of stress and torment, it felt righteous to see the police arrive only to hand him a formal warning for defying the court order. They informed him that if he persisted, he would face contempt of court charges and possible jail time. He glowered, eyes narrowed like a cornered animal. I braced myself, half expecting him to lash out physically. But at last he stepped back, fury radiating from him in waves. His voice trembled as he spat. "You'll regret this, Ava." For a split second, the old fear surged inside me, but it was quickly eclipsed by my newly forged resolve. I looked him directly in the eye. "No, Darius," the first said quietly. "That's one threat you can't make good on anymore." Around us, there was a silence so thick it felt as though the world held its breath. Then, in that stillness, I turned away from him for the last time. Without another glance, I went to stand with the people who had stood by me, who had invested their time, energy, and hearts in helping me reclaim my land. Life after that day slowly regained a sense of normalcy. The new fence line, legally recognized, was erected with Marina's diligent assistance. I found happiness in small things, replanting my mother's lilac bush, clearing debris under the centuries-old oak tree, painting my house's shutters a bright, hopeful shade to reflect my renewed spirit. Darius, stripped of his illusions of grandeur, kept mostly to himself, though I would occasionally catch him glaring from behind his windows. In the months that followed, I poured renewed love into my property, planting a new flower garden, marigolds, pansies, and even a couple of rose bushes. When I looked out across the yard, in the early morning sunlight, I felt the presence of my grandmother, my mother, and my great-grandmother. I sensed them in the rustle of the leaves, in the soft whisper of the wind that carried the promise. You are your mother's daughter. You are your grandmother's granddaughter. You are strong, and you will endure. What surprised me more than anything was how this ordeal shifted my perspective on community. My nature had always been solitary, but I learned how invaluable allies are. Marina and I grew incredibly close. We bonded over more than just the property dispute. She taught me how to repair fence posts, how to revamp my aging porch. In turn, I gave her piano lessons she had once confessed a longing to learn. Our friendship was a living testament to how adversity can forge unexpected connections. As spring melted into summer, my newly reclaimed land blossomed. The final, cathartic moment came when I held a small gathering in my backyard. I invited the people who had supported me, Marina, Mr. Yang, some neighbors who had likewise been bullied by Darius in the past, and together, we shared food, laughter, and tears of relief. On a small round table at the center, I placed a pot containing the resurrected lilac bush. Its petals filled the warm air with a gentle fragrance, a scented reminder that life endures, beauty prevails, and that from the ugliest trials, something worthy can still bloom. By the time twilight fell, we were seated around a crackling fire pit, the sun's last rays painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The conversation ebbed and flowed with the cicadas' song. In that hushed, dusky moment, I realized how far I had come. The days of anxious pacing, of waking up in cold sweats, of feeling small and powerless those days had ended. In their place was a fierce acceptance of my own strength, tempered by the warmth of new bonds. I looked around at the circle of gentle faces, lit by the dancing flames, Marina's encouraging smile, Mr. Yang's nod of satisfaction, the neighbours who finally had closure after all their own struggles, and felt a surge of gratitude that nearly took my breath away. The stolen land was back in rightful hands. The illusions of invincibility that had cloaked Darius were torn away. In that moment, my heart spoke to me. You stood up, Ava. You held on to what your ancestors bequeathed you, both the land and the fortitude. You fought for justice, for peace, and you found a courage you never knew you possessed. That is what made the victory so deeply satisfying. Yes, it was about property, my yard, my garden, my trees, but it was also about reclaiming the parts of myself I'd hidden for so long. My grandmother was right about listening to the wind. Sometimes, if you stand still enough on your own land, you can hear the echoes of those who stood in your place, fought their battles, and refused to be silenced. I still live in that cottage on Hawthorne Lane, quietly maintaining my grandmother's legacy, forging a new chapter of my own. The scars remain both literal and metaphorical, but every day is a reminder that I am, and always will be, the rightful guardian of my home. If there's one thing I learned, it's that no one has the right to rob you of the place you call your own. And though I would never have chosen such a painful road, in the end, I reclaimed not only my land, but also my voice, my sense of agency in a world that doesn't always fight fair. So yes, I faced down a bully and took back my property in the most satisfying way possible. But the deeper truth is that I also found the power of community, the strength of legacy, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and the land that has nurtured generations of her family. I found a part of me that I'd almost lost, the fiery, unyielding soul who, when tested, will stand firm no matter the odds. And that, more than anything, is my true triumph.